unofficial meetup, and we are lucky enough to have J.R. Storment here as our special guest speaker, who is actually the co-founder and president of the FinOps Foundation, the larger organization. So he is going to speak today, give you guys a little more background on what FinOps is. And then I'm going to give a talk about how we are managing costs at Morningstar and a new cost star rating that we rolled out to really drive optimization here. Before we get started, a couple things. This user group is member run, member focused. Everyone's welcome. Confidentiality, make sure that you don't share anything that's not public. No sales pitches, and then feedback and collaboration is encouraged. We want this to be interactive and knowledge sharing. So with that, I will hand it off to JR.
Hey, thank you. It's also my first time in Chicago, so I'm very excited to be here. I was telling the folks I had deep dish and took a boat ride yesterday, so did all the touristy things. Just so I understand sort of the makeup of the audience, how many of you are doing FinOps currently, or know what it is? All right, ish. Okay, so keep your hands up. Are you in finance? Couple? Are you in engineering, product? Couple? Great. Okay. And out of this, we'll just shout it out. Like, what are you looking to FinOps for? Like, what are you wanting from this talk and from FinOps in general? Cost. Okay. Visibility. Good, yes. Education internally is important. Anybody else? Perfect. Optimization. Okay, great. This is good. Now I can shape my talk. So a little background on me. I spent the last, I guess it's been about 9 years now, building a company called Cloudability, which was recently acquired by Apptio. And over the years, we always had these customer advisory boards come together where people would talk about, we talk about the product. And what we found increasingly, people would come to us, the customer advisory people, and say, we don't actually want to talk as much about the product. We want to talk about the best practice. We want to talk about the education. We want to talk about the standards. Talking points, as you mentioned, it's a big thing. Like, companies are going through this transformation, they don't actually know how to implement the transformational change. So this is where the foundation came out of, was this idea of, okay, we've got visibility into all these companies around the world who are doing this. How do we actually pull together this new best practice, this new literally job description that people are doing? And the core issue and where this all came out of was this concept, right, which is cloud and DevOps. And we talk about DevOps, it's really about that like fast speed of delivery, right? You're pushing out feature updates quickly. And cloud did one very important thing. It removed constraints. It meant you no longer had to wait for resources. And this really changed the procurement model. I was speaking a week or two ago in Vegas to a bunch of CIOs, and they're all used to controlling the spend, and they no longer do that. And this really has pushed the spending down to engineers. And engineers are literally able to procure resources and quickly get them, which is a good thing, it's not a bad thing, and spend company money sort of at will. So the reason we say it's a good thing is this. When I think about what the cloud economy is, we say, okay, what drives value today in business? It turns out that the most valuable companies in the world now are software companies. And it turns out now that most companies are trying to become software companies. So a favorite example is Alaska Airlines. They said, the CIO said, we're no longer an airline, we're a software company with wings. Because they know they need to deliver the best experiences, the best data. So we're working with Qantas a few years back, and Qantas uses the cloud to drive the best flight patterns across the Pacific. Right? So in this world, a couple things changed. So we start in this area of data center. How many of you are hybrid at this point, data center plus cloud? Anybody cloud only? Nice. How big's the company? All right, that's usually how it goes. So hybrid is a real thing because we spent decades investing into data centers. And the key thing here, you all know about CapEx and OpEx, but these are fixed costs, right? These are costs that we have sort of, once we spend it, the money is sunk and it's there. So there's a certain set of behavior that we understand that. What happened in the 2000s was these born-in-the-web companies. So it's the eBays, it's the Amazons, these companies who literally came in and changed the way that consumers expect to interact with companies. They expect to have a really nice experience. They expect to get good data. They expect to get good interfaces. You couple that with cloud, and EC2 launched in 2006-ish, DevOps came in, Agile came in, and you had this explosion of what we call the cloud economy, where you've now got cloud-centric IT. So in the bubble that I lived in, 7 or 8 years ago, working with cloud-first companies, I thought everybody was cloud-first. Now that I work with much larger companies, I find that most of them are aspiring to be cloud-first. But the idea is people are trying to go in this direction to cloud-centric IT, and the key thing in the blue there is the variable cost aspect. The move from CapEx to OpEx, it's fine, it's interesting, it's accounting. What's really interesting is the move from I own a thing to I can turn a thing on and off, because that's an actual behavior change in engineering, which pushes decision-making down to the floor. And of course, the problem's just getting bigger. The Gartner numbers kind of consistently get larger. I think the latest one is actually $500 billion, but cloud is hitting a tipping point. And I always like to get down to the facts around just even in AWS. There are hundreds of thousands of SKUs, like individual products that you can buy. And for some of the big companies who are spending hundreds of millions a month, because that, like the big spenders now are literally $500 million a month. I'm sorry, a year, $500 million a year. There's a lot of data coming through, right? There's a lot of detail. And so it gets really hard to sort of pull out the signal from the noise as part of this. What we've seen is this switch from the platform team essentially saying, okay, we need servers, we need infrastructure. I want to go get, this box or this box. And what they did historically was they went to procurement, right? Procurement said, okay, cool, you need it. Let's show the business case. You've got budget approval. Now we get the money. In this world, engineers are requesters, right? Finance are approvers. It's a very static and predictable spend, but at the same time, it's a very long cycle to get what you need. So enter in AWS or GCP or Azure. Now suddenly you've got this aspect where these folks can go straight to the money. And you end up with procurement and finance and a lot of the business not very happy about the circumstance around that. So in this model, we now have engineers spending money. Finance doesn't necessarily have the visibility of what's happening. It's not predictable, but when I say it's a good thing, experimentation happens, right? Cloud is not about spending less money. It's about how do we actually enable the companies to move more quickly? How do we enable innovation? How do we enable this world where we give the best experience to our customers? So a few things pop up in this world. Part of the shift is decentralization. Not just out to a few leaders in IT organizations, but down to actual individual engineers spending money on the ground. Cloud spending is now hitting a place where it's material. We're seeing companies at that hundreds of millions a year with their individual cloud provider. The variable aspect becomes important because now we actually need to change behavior of engineering teams. And we're also seeing, I spent the last couple of years in London, there's a lot of macroeconomic instability out there where people are saying, okay, if there's a downturn, if I really need to tighten my margins, if Brexit happens when it finally does, what do we do about this? Efficiency is going to be important. So this is the environment which FinOps has grown up. So when we talk about FinOps, it's really about financial accountability within that variable spend model. And there's 3 things that it brings. The first is all about how do we actually not just bring in cost optimization, and we're going to talk a bit more about that, but how do we bring in a cultural change? Prescriptive details, models, changes to how we actually operate in the organization. The second is to actually start to enable all those teams, and I mentioned these 3 teams, and there may be others that you call them, product, business, IT, tech, but these teams have to come together in a way that they typically have not come together, and they have to talk about things they typically aren't used to talking about. And all this is really about business decision-making, right? So it's not just necessarily about spending less, it's about how do we enable the right decisions to happen at the end of the day. So in this new model, we have engineers, finance, and business coming together as one, right? They're actually making decisions together. Procurement is instant, low cost of failure, but you have to encourage this new level of conversation and experimentation. And so cost ops, so I keep pointing at you, the guy who said that. A lot of people think of FinOps as cost optimization, but it's not. That's one very small piece of the puzzle. A lot of the companies I work with and talk to, they're actually trying to spend more money in cloud, right? They're trying to move more out of the data center. They're trying to grow their businesses. They're trying to get more revenue. So the bigger part of this is all the rest, right? It's collaboration between teams. We did a survey recently in the FinOps Foundation about what was the biggest challenge with FinOps, and the number one thing was education. People wanted talking points. Like, how do I get my teams collaborating around this? You've got to get new goals and KPIs. You got to reporting. You got to automate it. All this is part of the circle that comes together. It's a much larger process. And at the end of the day, we don't necessarily want to spend less. We want to make the choice between these 3 things. Is it going to be high quality? Is it going to be fast? Is it going to be, cheap? It depends on the workload. Is it a development workload? Is it production? Is it my customer-facing thing? We want to enable decision-making around cloud choices that empower the business. And so as we get into the process of FinOps, there's a life cycle. We put it into 3 groups. So the first is the inform phase, and it's very much about what's happening, right? I want to understand the spend. I want to see where it's going. I want to allocate it and charge it back. Then we get into the optimize phase, which could be about reducing costs, could be about spending more, frankly. It could be saying we're going to go into this other service that's more expensive, but it lets us get rid of a whole team who is managing those databases because now it's Aurora instead of RDS. And the third level is how do we start to pull this into the company, right? How do we operate new technology and new conversations so that we continuously improve upon this process? Within the FinOps model, we have sort of a double-ended thing. We've got, on one end, accountability being pushed out to the edge, right? You want your individual product teams and feature teams to manage their own usage of resources. However, you want to pull together that centralized team, as Katelyn has done here, who's defining best practice, who's looking at how do we actually start to figure out how to rate people internally? How do we actually figure out how to push out the tools, the information, the cultural change that needs to happen? And in many cases, as this one is focused on, it's about how do we get the best discounts, right, with our cloud providers. In the previous slide, you get engineers using less. In this world, we want to have you use what you want, but then how do we get the best rate, the best RIs, the best CUDs, the best whatever it is you're going for? Critically to this, and I've watched this happen for, 8, 9 years now, it's a crawl, walk, run process. This thing, we portrayed the cycle is a cycle because you don't want to go through it once and get to the end. In the first stage, you might get your basic tags in place for inform. In the next phase, you might do your first turning off of things that are not being used. And third phase, you might start to get in Jira ticketing that shares the operational information out to the organization. The idea is don't run too quickly into this. Like start with small bits. You've got to bring the entire organization up to speed with you. If there was an end, and I like to say it's a circle, it shouldn't be an end, but it's this. Like this is where we want to end up, which is getting to unit economics. How do we say, I don't care what we're spending on cloud? There's always this debate eventually, like company cloud spending gets to a level and the CFO or the CIO says, whoa, we're spending too much. It's like, well, are we? Like, are we spending too much or are we spending the right amount? You want to move out of how much are we spending into how much are we paying per customer or how much are we paying per transaction? How do we get to the level of tying the spend back into the business? This is the goal. So this is what we came together on the FinOps Foundation, is how do we do, not necessarily the tech, because if you go to Amazon reInvent or Google Next, it's all about the new tech. But underneath that, there's a whole set of business decisions that need to be made. There's a whole set of collaborations that need to happen. So we started this thing back in February. It's only, I guess, what are we at? 9 months now, 10 months, with 30 founding members. And it's really kind of blown up because we find people want to come together to have this conversation. Katelyn and I were talking earlier this morning. It's hard to find the rest of you, right? Like, it's easy to find the engineers, it's easy to find the finance people, but those who are thinking about both sides together. So the community's been growing very quickly on the back of this. And I want to invite each of you, if you want, to join it. This is a screenshot from one of our recent meetings. We do these Zoom meetings every couple weeks. And the Zoom meetings are typically around a topic. The most recent one was AWS savings plans. This one was general FinOps learnings. But we typically get about 100, 125 other people like you, FinOps practitioners, who come together to have conversations and speak about different topics. And you'll see from the mix of people, it's sort of an interesting mix. You've got, so Mike Fuller is one of the co-founders of the organization. He's an engineer. Jason Fuller, no relation. They actually live very far apart, but is more on the business side. Then you've got people like Anders, who's in procurement. And you've got people like Joe, he's actually a finance guy. So it's an interesting mix of people who have come together. And the idea is this: how do we start to share that information, right? How do we do migration to operation? How do we figure out how to charge back in these organizations? The organization is starting to scale up. Thank you, Chicago FinOps, right here, the most recent event. Very exciting to see. We're seeing these pop up in different cities as well. And ultimately, what we're trying to create is communication. This is a screenshot from the Slack thread that we have around various topics. But if you want to be a part of this, we can come in here and talk about FinOps. We can talk about optimization. We can talk about the automation. And ultimately, what we're trying to pull out of the whole thing is these best practices. We say at the beginning of the calls often, hey, look, don't share confidential information. Very important. But also, we're going to take best practice out of this. We're going to do anonymized best practice. At a conference a few months ago, we talked about the principles of FinOps, which we worked on with AWS. And this is where this sort of group is. It's not about, I'm going to dictate how you run your cloud. It's about what are the core things that we need to drive into the organization? What is the cultural change that needs to happen? And a big part of this really is collaboration, right? At the end of the day, how do we get the teams talking about all these things to drive better decision value? How many of you have driven an electric car? 2. If I was on the West Coast, it would be way higher. Sorry, I'm from Portland. So if you've ever been in like a Prius, called the Prius Effect, if you put your foot down heavily on the pedal, the diagram changes. All the energy flows out of the battery into the motor. And if you lift up, all the battery flows back into the battery. So the first time I drove an electric car, it was kind of like an interesting effect because it instantly changed the way that I drove. I had started driving more conservatively. But I could make a choice to put down my foot heavily to go fast, but I understood the impact. And this is really what FinOps is about, right? It's not that we want to let up on the gas. Sometimes we're going to make the decision to put our foot down heavily on the gas. But at the end of the day, we want to be doing that with data that informs our decisions so that we can actually have an impact on the business. And this is this sort of feedback change and the feedback loop that we're trying to create. I think I'm near the end here. As part of that, what you also want to pull in, and Katelyn's going to talk a lot about today, are metrics. Metrics are really critical to FinOps. And metrics can't just be numbers, they need to have targets. Mike Fuller, who I mentioned earlier, who we've co-authored this book about this, he talks about metric-driven cost optimization. You need to have a threshold you're heading toward, and every action you take in cloud, in your optimizations, whatever it is, needs to be toward moving that metric, rather than just we're going to spend less. So I'm going to pass to Katelyn here. If you guys want to dig in more around FinOps, please join the community. It's finops.org. We also have a book that's coming out in about 3 weeks. It's finally going to be in print. It's available online right now. That's really been a collection of taking all the inputs from all the member meetings and helping people define the best practice. And we've also just launched a certification. This has happened, I think, now twice. We're scaling up 5 or 6 of them in Q1 around the country, hoping to do one in Chicago. That really starts to lay the groundwork in your organization to say, okay, what are the core things you need to understand? So thank you for the time, and hope to see you at one of the future meetings.
Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what we're doing to manage costs and how we are driving optimization here at Morningstar. Here's a brief overview of kind of what I'm going to touch on about Morningstar, a little bit about our public cloud journey, what we've done to kind of establish financial governance, and then a new thing that we've rolled out, a cost star rating that is really helping us drive optimization. If you don't know what Morningstar is, we are an independent investment research company. We leverage our core competencies in data and research to create products that empower investors. Our public cloud journey, a little background on this, really started in kind of early 2017. At that time, we had a very small public cloud footprint. One team was really active. I think that was from a previous acquisition, and a couple of small individual accounts that were given to employees to kind of do exploration and get familiar with the platform. We also had a center of excellence, which had various stakeholders from across the business that kind of came together to really help establish our strategy and vision. So this slide here is just kind of what our vision ended up. So what came out of it and kind of why cloud. So we wanted to own and operate less infrastructure, increase speed to market, support quick entry into emerging markets, support maximum client uptime and availability, and then having an efficient and transparent cost structure. An update on where we are today. So we've done 3 data center migrations. We've reduced our server count by over 3,000. Our public cloud footprint has grown significantly. We have over 600 accounts. 120 of these roughly are team accounts. And then we have another 500 individual accounts that are given out to Morningstar employees, and that is, again, to just give them the opportunity to explore and gain familiarity with the platform. And lastly, we have a dedicated cloud services team that's kind of here to really help facilitate this adoption of public cloud and make it successful. On the financial governance front, I think we did a really good job of recognizing that there was a need for cost management early on. I was part of the original Center of Excellence. Sorry, did you have a question? No, we still have an on-prem footprint. Yeah. So we did a good job of recognizing that there was a need for cost management early on, but that doesn't mean that we haven't had our struggles and challenges. Some of these being cost awareness. I think we've made some progress on the awareness piece, the continuous monitoring, realizing that the cost management is a continuous life cycle. It doesn't just end after a budget approval is something that we're working on. Adopting a public cloud mindset. We are still over provisioning resources in the cloud. We're really bad at estimating, tend to over forecast, which most people might say, oh, well, that's a good thing, which yes, it is, but at the same time, we're looking at opportunity, what we could have done with that funding instead. And then the last piece is just budgeting and forecasting agility, trying to shift that process to be more agile and in line with public cloud. So one of our key focus areas this year was really establishing a sound financial governance process. So we kind of addressed one of our key challenges, which was taking a more agile approach to budgeting. Instead of making teams really figure out and approving all of the requests and new initiatives up front during the fall, which has kind of typically been how we approach things. We did a reserve pool this year, and we established a governance committee that is made up of our CFO, CIO, CTO, P&L leads, and tech leads. So again, bringing together all the key stakeholders and important pieces of the FinOps model together to make decisions. And this committee is really there to approve initiatives and then make sure that we are all lines of the business are in communication and in line. In addition, we also have a business case template. We did have this last year. We made some enhancements this year, but we made this a requirement for any new initiative in the cloud. Oh, sorry, you're taking a picture or is it a question? Okay, sorry. The business case template, for this, what we do is there's a technical and a financial review that is done before that these actually get to the governance committee. The financial review, so on my side, I perform that, and that is really for me to look at, okay, if the team is already active in Amazon, are they optimized? If not, how much can they optimize and self-fund that initiative? And if they are new and don't have any active initiatives, making sure that they're optimized from the start. Another thing that this has kind of helped with, going back to one of our struggles, getting bad at estimating, really working with teams to really document and understand what the cost drivers are. So is it, onboarding new clients, for example, and then getting better at documenting what our assumptions were so that we can go back and kind of have a benchmark and understand where we may have been off. So with that kind of foundation in place, a little bit about how we are continuously managing costs, because we know that this is a continuous cycle and it doesn't end in the cloud.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I broke your slides.
Oh, no worries.
My bad. She sent them to me and they're all messed up.
So touching on these kind of three key components here, starting off first with the inform. Some of these are kind of probably generic, seen across most companies, such as the kind of weekly spend reports and showbacks. We are transparent about our spend across all teams, so we don't limit visibility. We let teams see how much other teams are spending. One unique thing that we did this year that I think has been really successful is quarterly business reviews. Since it's not really feasible to go through and look at everything that every active initiative in the governance committee meetings, we set up quarterly business reviews with all the P&Ls, and that is really to touch base, keep open communication channels, review actuals versus budget quarter to date, and then identify any trends that we've noticed and then opportunities for optimization. In addition, training. One thing here, don't underestimate the power of a 1-hour training session. We did this during lunch a couple months ago, and we saw costs come down $12K the next month. So, yes. Ways that we can kind of improve on this aspect, tagging, get more granular reporting. So that's something in 2020 that we really want to work on. Enforcing our tagging strategy. Another kind of struggle, real-time budget versus actuals. A lot of it is, after the fact. We need to be in real time to really is more relevant. And then the last piece here is automation, less spreadsheets. I kind of manage all of this on the back end in a lot of Excel spreadsheets, so I'd like to get out of that, even though I do love Excel. But so on the next piece here, optimize. One of the biggest things here is trying to remove the stigma around cost optimization and really helping teams to change the mindset that this is not a cost-cutting exercise, and this is about maximizing the value of the dollars that you're putting in public cloud. So things that we're doing this year to really drive optimization. We set optimization targets across the company for all the teams. Right now, we're at 87% to goal. In addition, we also have an RI coverage target that we set across the company, which was 60%. We met that goal, so we kind of increased our target. We've also, again, reiterating on the training and awareness, continuing to do this. And then the last piece, which I'll touch on more in a second here, is the cost start rating. Things that we can do better. Go ahead.
Do you track how much RI waste you have?
Yeah, we do look at how many underutilized. Oh, that's versus actually utilization of reservations. You're saying the on-demand?
No, like you paid upfront for X number of RIs and they're not used. It's either a legacy family.
Yes. So we're primarily in AWS. So they have a cost explorer dashboard that you can kind of go in, and I have access to the corporate bill where I can kind of track and see which instances may be significantly underutilized. So we do check in on that. We've been pretty good. I think we're at 99% utilization across all of our reservations. So, yep.
So the latest announcement from AWS for savings plan?
Yes.
Any plans and then Viva migration?
So that has kind of is maybe going to impact our increased RI coverage target. I'm still kind of digesting that, and kind of we still need to establish a plan of how we're going to kind of go forward with that. I think we'll definitely, I'm sure, utilize that, but I think we need to, there's some things on the back end that we need to make sure that we have established before we move forward on that. Last thing, things that we can do better, being more proactive. Right now we're really reactive, being more proactive. Right now it's reactive. So that's going to be something we're focusing on next year. Last piece here, operate. So things that we've done, we established kind of a foundation, which is this financial governance committee. Again, continuously being more agile. We even adjusted kind of our budgeting process that we did this year to plan for 2020. And then continuously enhancing collaboration, making sure knowledge sharing between the FAs that support the product technology teams and then these tech teams. Areas for improvement. One thing that we want to do in 2020 is work on kind of pairing with the architecture office, since cost optimization is a pillar of the well-architected framework. And then another thing again, automation.
Wait, it works now.
I didn't want to, given all of these areas of focus, have you seen an increase in the demand for resources, and have you added any additional staff?
I mean, there's definitely a demand. There's an increase in demand.
Okay.
I would say, yeah.
Have you added staff?
What was that?
Have you added any additional staff?
I think Tony might be able to answer this better, but in terms of like the cloud services team that we have to support them, we're relatively small in terms, I guess, if you look at that in terms of how big our cloud footprint is.
Okay.
Less than, I think, maybe 30 people, around 20 people.
Thank you.
Another Katelyn to the mix. No, Katelyn's a one-woman army. So we'll have to try and figure out, our goal here is to scale Katelyn through automation. That's sort of where we're trying to go.
Yes.
I mean that in a positive way for Katelyn's career, by the way. Yeah. So that's the goal. We'll see how it goes. That's a focus for next year.
So because we did more of a, we're taking more agile approach,
Do it again.
oh, go ahead, you can ask your question again so everyone hears.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about continuous reforecasting?
So because we took a more agile approach to the budgeting and forecasting, we're trying to be more flexible, and part of this is just continuously reforecasting with teams, because we saw that they tend to overestimate what their actual needs are, and that helps us give a better idea of what our capacity is to take on new initiatives, and then, what our walk-in would be for the following year. So that's essentially, usually quarterly, I'll take, the top teams that are driving most of the favorability and really sit down with them and then try to see if we can update the forecast and estimates.
How often are you doing that?
Quarterly about. We definitely would like to do that more frequently, but
The challenge that we see on our side is because we cannot estimate like cost based on what technology we're going to use going forward, right? That is the challenge for us, how much can the cost is going to be coming up.
so that's definitely been a challenge too, and I think trying to break this down and think about what the drivers are. We had one initiative that was, based on how many accounts that we were transitioning. So we had the FA that supports this product, P&L, came in and kind of helped, provide some metrics on what the, expected transition, how many accounts we were going to do quarterly, and then we used that to kind of work together and understand what the incremental cost would be, impact per account, and then measure that out. So I think trying to break it down and look at, okay, what's driving the cost, and then how does every, incremental addition of this driver, what's the impact of that?
Go on.
Sorry.
Are you or do you plan to start implementing chargebacks?
We would like to. I think the biggest piece here, which our focus on in 2020, is just enforcing our tagging strategy, and that'll really help us be able to charge this back. We do showbacks right now.
What approach are you taking to enforcing strategy? Is it public shaming or public flogging?
Both?
More public shaming, unfortunately, but no, it's just, again, trying to continuously inform and get costs in front of teams to make sure that, continuously reminding them they got to keep their eye on it in order to effectively manage costs in the cloud.
Do you look at your cost center tagging coverage?
We do. It's a little difficult because there's some teams have gone maybe rogue on what the strategy is, so they're not using the appropriate, structure of how to tag something. So that plays into the mix a little bit too. I haven't looked at what our latest coverage is on that, but that'll be something I'll definitely be tracking next year. All right. Moving on to the next piece, cost star rating. So this is something new this year that we rolled out. What is it? Essentially, this is a way for us to surface the metrics, cost and usage around public cloud to teams, and really just rate them on how optimized they are in the cloud. We do this on a 5-star scale. So if you have a 5-star, you're doing really well. If you have a 3-star, you're doing okay. 1, not so good. Maybe we need to improve on that a little bit. And this rating is incorporated into a weekly scorecard that the product scorecards, which have been existing previously, teams have received these to measure their security, DR, and operational readiness in the past. So this is just kind of an example on the left-hand side of what a team would receive, and now Cost Star is a new component of this. Just to clarify, this is this rating is internal use only. This is not to be confused with our Morningstar rating. So, and then the scorecard is basically created through Brinka.
So is it guaranteed that teams will receive 1 star, theoretically, if it's on a full shape?
Yes, yeah. We don't, at least on the methodology that we have on how we're scoring teams, there's no, the lowest right now is a 1 star. We don't do.
Right, but a team will receive 1 star.
Yes, yes.
Even, they could be doing really well, but because the way that other teams operate, they could receive 1 star.
So the way we do this is, so our team account structure is done 1 prod and 1 non-prod account for each team. So what happens is these teams then are evaluated on just their accounts and their usage. So this isn't an overall rating of all teams. Each team gets to see how they're performing individually. The methodology, so to come up with kind of the methodology of, what metrics we were going to use to determine opportunities to optimize, and then how we were going to score teams. We had a working group and made sure that we had various stakeholders from different parts of the business to make sure that we were, putting together metrics that were realistic and that were attainable. Our first phase that we rolled out, we are leveraging Trusted Advisor as kind of our data source. So if you're not familiar with Trusted Advisor, this is a AWS native tool that provides recommendations on cost optimization is just one of them. Other things are performance, reliability, and security. So this is kind of the foundation of where we started our cost star rating. Going a little more into detail, the methodology. So how do we go about this? The first thing we did was we looked at all of our spend and categorized these by service, identifying what the top spenders were. Those were the areas that we really wanted to, we put in, opportunity tier 1, what we wanted to target. The next step in that was, okay, we've identified our top 3 spend in terms of services. What metrics can we use to identify optimization opportunities? And then based on that, what severity level do we think is appropriate? I added an example here, so this would be maybe something for EC2. If the average CPU is less than 5% per week, and the maximum CPU, let's say, is less than 20% per week, then we would say that is potentially a resource that is could be further optimized, and then a ticket would be created, and then we have it assigned severity to that. And so then those tickets or optimization checks all play a role together in determining what the overall rating is for the team. So the cost star rating then is, we basically look at how many issues are outstanding or optimization tickets. So a team, for example, couldn't get higher than a 1 star if they had, let's say, at least 2 critical tickets or more than 5 high severity tickets. Oh, sorry, there's another photo. Little bit, the toolkit here on how we're kind of pulling this all together. We have a scanning engine, Trusted Advisor I touched base on. We would like to expand this out to other data sources at some point. Jira is our issue tracking tool, so that's where these optimization checks are created, and then Brinka calculates the rating. For people who are more visual, like I am, our scanning engine will plug in or hook into Trusted Advisor and then perform checks and scan for any resources that meet some of these, underutilized optimization checks. If there's a match, then we will, an issue will be created in Jira for each of these findings, and then, the severity that we have determined will be assigned to that ticket as well. These tickets then will all filter into Brinka, where the overall rating will then be calculated.
And then just back to the
As far as these, so a lot of these checks are very similar to what you'd see in Trusted Advisor, but we've just kind of changed the threshold, and we were more conservative just to kind of see how things rolled out. I'll go through a little bit of some of the results that we've been able to capture and maybe how we're gonna maybe change some of these going forward. This next slide is an example of what a JIRA ticket issue would be. So if there was a low utilization EC2 instance, a team would get one issue like this that details out the resource ID so they know, okay, which resource it is, what's the severity of it, and what the finding is. Remediation. So to help teams, remediate some of these issues, we do have a link in the actual product scorecard where we send them to a wiki page that we have that gives them resources to understand more about the methodology and then how they can optimize. Exception handling, we do have a process in place and we're trying to maybe get better at this and then find a way to automate this, maybe through tagging so that it doesn't require so much manual effort on our end going forward. And then if the appropriate action is taken, so if they right-size it or they decommission it, then what happens is we do this scan on a weekly basis. The scan will run again, and then the ticket will close if that finding is not there anymore.
Do you let the team know? Like, do you close it automatically? Do you know? Or?
We do not. They can see on their scorecard how many outstanding tickets they have, and then they can also go in and see, how many closed as well. So they do have insights. They could go into it, but we don't, notify. Yeah. So we're doing this in a phased approach. Our first phase was focusing on EC2, RDS, and EBS. Those are some of the top services that we consume in terms of spend. We have had over 3,000 findings identified to date. My percentages they're off the chart, but as you can see, EC2 is the majority of the findings, underutilized EC2 instances. To date, of those over 3,000 findings, 2,416 of them have been remediated. This chart on the bottom here, which is kind of interesting, showing in the purple how many tickets were open. In the blue line is the number of tickets that were created each month, and then green is how many tickets are closed. We initially, when we did this, started just surfacing the data on the scorecard, and then in just October, we started impacting their overall rating. So that's where that was taking into consideration the cost star, how their DR scoring, security, and everything. And interestingly enough, we saw a kind of decrease in the number of tickets outstanding. In addition, in November, we're 2/3 through the month. There's only 200 new tickets that have been created versus historically we've been around 400 new tickets. So these are some just findings. I think basically showing that teams are aware and taking action. As far as goals and some results, so my goal is to get all of the teams to at least a 3-star and above by the end of the year. Right now we are at 51% of our target. This bar chart right here just kind of shows a historical trend. So you can see that we're up 27% to date. We're at 51% right now. We started off at 24%. Again, reiterating that teams are aware and that there's some actions being taken. Some other results in terms of just the services. So it's been a little difficult to quantify savings just because of how dynamic some parts of the environment are. There's a lot of teams that are in growth mode, so that may overlap some optimization. So it's kind of hard to, at least it's something that we're working on to try and figure out a better way to track that. General statistics are things that we've seen. So we do in Trusted Advisor, in Q3 compared to Q2, we saw a 16% decrease in the number of underutilized instances, 28% decrease in the number of RDS instances that were underutilized, and then a 5% decrease in EBS volumes. One thing to keep in note here is that The trusted advisor checks are, again, maybe we're more conservative, so that just is, we may be making less of an impact because of that. On the EC2 front, we saw there was a slight decrease in monthly costs. Looking at how many, EC2 instance hours in terms of, cost per EC2 instance hour on a monthly basis, we're down 13.1%. Our inventory, total number of EC2 instances, has remained relatively flat, so that, I guess, my thought there would be that more of this is just about right-sizing instances and using auto-scaling versus maybe resources that we spun up and left running as a POC. And then I think one of the key takeaways here is just based on the number of tickets and our decrease in findings that EC2 optimization is going to be a key area of focus on training for next year. On the RDS front, this was interesting. Monthly costs are down 19.3%, and then the actual number, our inventory of RDS instances, is down 11.6%. So that means that we're actually decommissioning and terminating resources versus right-sizing. So that may have been things that we left up for POC, again. So tagging is one way we're thinking about maybe trying to address that, just to make sure that teams don't forget about these resources. On the EBS front, we set a materiality threshold of the EBS volumes that were in scope for scanning. So based on just, the low number of tickets that generated and kind of no material really impact noted, we probably want to look at reassessing our threshold there. A couple enhancements in progress. So again, this is just incorporating materiality of potential savings into the methodology, or at least into the tickets to help teams really prioritize, making sure that they're focusing on the where they can make the most wins versus the $100 versus $2 savings. So prioritization, and then being able to easily quantify the savings from the remediation of these tickets. That is all I have. Does anyone have any questions, recommendations, feedback?
You had listed.
Wait.
You had listed, going back 2 slides, yeah, that slide, EC2, RDS, and EBS, are these your top spends? Yeah. So you look at all the services as well?
We do, yeah. And we'll continuously reevaluate this and see where, what areas we need to focus on or what services we need to focus on.
Okay.
Is that because primarily that you have got the RIs available on those, or is it like other services also you look at?
Sorry, the RIs on?
Because you do have RIs available on these, right? So
Yes.
But is that the primarily thing that you look at, optimization, or the other things also you look at, other services also you look at?
We look at RI coverage. There's some more things that we kind of take into account. My monthly cost decrease here was taking into consideration just kind of our on-demand spend of EC2 instances that we have right now. So taking out any instances that are already covered by RIs. We haven't really made any big new purchases in the over this term. So a lot of them have been renewals. Right now, we're really trying to focus on, making sure that teams are auto-scaling if they can and turning off resources versus before we kind of increase our coverage some more. But I think this is a good indicator just based on that overall our teams are optimizing.
Have you thought about, I know this is FinOps, but have you ever thought about incorporating security issues into the star rating?
Yes, that actually is factored in to a separate, that actually rolls up under the actual security rating in the team's product scorecard. So there we do have security scans that we are running. Those are impacting.
If you don't mind, I just want to highlight something I think is really interesting based on what you said, which is everything you've got listed here is about using less, right? These are all team actions, like underutilization, get down inventory, get rid of EBS volumes, which is like that decentralized part. And then the centralized part to the RIs is about paying less for what you're using. And I think it's an important distinction because ultimately the centralized FinOps team should be empowering, as you're doing, Katelyn, the teams to use less, but then they should be consolidating how do we pay the least amount for what we need to use, which RIs are one way to do that, AWS savings plans are another one, and that's where you get the economy of scale with centralized teams so that she can say, look, here's what you're using now. Now that we know you need to use it, we're gonna try and get the best rate for it, basically.
Yeah, do you utilize spot instances, or what are the cases for that?
We do. We have one team, our quant team, that does. They're probably the biggest and really only team. I think that that's definitely an area that we'd like to explore more. It's just making sure that teams really understand how to, efficiently use those.
Yeah, because we're just starting to look at those and just wondering what good use cases would be.
Any other questions? Oh,
Could you see open sourcing the methodology so that the community or whomever could improve on it? Because it seems like you're using a lot of Trusted Advisor and TBD.
but yeah, I'd have to get back on that one potentially.
So this is for JR, right? Do you think that savings plan would basically replace or for not just RIs, but like for spot?
We just did a FinOps Foundation member call on this very topic. Will savings plan replace RIs? And interestingly, you were on the call, I think, right? Yeah, I mean, it was kind of split. Like people who were like using a lot of RIs were like, we're going to keep doing RIs, but I think a big part of that was process, right? They've got the teams understanding how it works, and everybody wants to move to savings plans, but it's going to take some time to get there. I think the spot versus RI and savings plans are very different things. RIs, typically you see big enterprises using them to secure the best rate for a workload. Spot, you need to re-engineer, ideally to actually be able to account for something that can go away. We see it, like spots used more for batch processing and things that are not stateless, or they are stateless, whatever that goes. So I think they're different, right? Yeah, sorry, I'm not an engineer. I hear the terms sometimes, try to repeat them. But it's all a combination. Spot typically is like, we don't see as many big enterprises doing it. We see smaller companies doing it because more engineering forward cultures. When you take your RIs and your various volume discounts, often enterprises are like, we can get price low enough that we don't have to engineer around, spot, essentially. So that wasn't really an answer, but yes, depends. Yes, Ant. Yeah. Let me give this to you here. We're recording.
That if you were to work with discrete manufacturers like the Rust Belt companies, just-in-time manufacturing, Agile, they've already been doing that for years. This is, the advent of the cloud is new, especially to a company like Morningstar, that all their product is delivered over the web as opposed to shipping products. But my question is, manufacturing companies that may have done this around their supply chains, do you find them to be a little more receptive and in tune? The finance organizations are a little more in tune with what we're talking about here because they've done this in their manufacturing protocol. I guess that would be my question.
So you're stealing one of our favorite talk tracks, which is like, this is supply chain management, and the people who did this best was the auto industry before. Toyota did this. We're basically recreating what Toyota did on cloud. To the question of like, are they more receptive? I'd say, unfortunately, there's this maturity curve in cloud, which is like, the early adopters, the early majority, et cetera. A lot of those companies are still sort of on the laggard side, right? So they don't think about cloud in that way, but ultimately, I would hope to see them adopting that. It's a really good parallel. It is, yeah.
All right. So what's next? I have a couple of resources here, links. First is the FinOps Foundation, and then the next is to the actual Meetup group for this Chicago FinOps chapter. I'll share these slides out through either Eventbrite or the Meetup group. The next meeting, I would love to host it sometime in Q1 2020. So if you're interested in actually hosting at your office or co-organizing, please reach out. My contact information, is at the end of this slide, and I'll send that out. Lunch, sorry, we went a little bit over. That should be set up outside. If you wanted to sit down and eat it here, the cafeteria over down the hallway that way, you can go take whatever I don't know what they got. Margaret, do you know? Soprafina. So you guys can feel free to grab those. If you need to use the restroom, they're through the main hall by the elevators. Women's to the left, men's to the right. And that is it. Thank you guys so much for coming.